Hello, I'm Frank Conkling. This is Panda Consulting's ArcGIS workshop. On this session of the workshop, we're going to actually look at mapping easements. Mapping easements in ArcGIS Pro with standard editing tools, and every once in a while we'll go and show you how to do the same sort of thing in Parcel Fabric. This really isn't a Parcel Fabric workshop, but it's more of let's look at this and see how we actually can go and modify this. So the first thing we want to do is just talk about, by the way, if you look at the QR code down at the lower right corner, that will get you to Panic Consulting's website. You can see who we are, what we do, why we do it, and how we do it. You'll also get some links to go and sign up if you want to go and attend these workshops live. Please go ahead and do that, and we appreciate it. Also, if you are here live right now, just know that Chris is here and he is moderating the chat window. So if you have any questions, any comments, go ahead and put them in the chat window and Chris will make sure that I get them answered. All right, thank you. All right, first thing we want to do is talk about what is an easement. There's a lot of issues and concerns that I hear often from our clients about what is an easement. And an easement is actually a slightly different way of holding ownership or holding the ability to go and use somebody else's land. So it's a legal right for someone else to use your property for a specified use. And that's really important, is that it's not giving somebody else a right to use your property for anything they want to do. It's really only allowing them to do it for a specified use in a specified area. So for example, if you have a utility easement, that utility easement actually has to go and list who is actually going to be able to use this and for what purposes they're going to be able to use it. So for example, if it's a utility easement, they would be allowed to go, that utility entity would be allowed to go and install utility pipes, and they'd be allowed to get onto that property to maintain those utility pipes. But it does not allow them, for example, to go and dig a drainage ditch or anything else in there. It's limited for a specific use in specific areas for specific people. It doesn't allow an easement holder to go and grant a right to someone else. It is very, very specific in what it's for. There is a slight difference between an easement and a dedication. A dedication, which often appears on a subdivision plat and stuff, doesn't always go and list who the actual recipient of that right is. When there's a flat dedication, it's interpreted as being a dedication to the public so that there's multiple people can use it, even though it might contain some limiting verbiage as far as what it's to be used for. So there is some slight variations on here. Anyway, an easement is a very specific area and is for a specific purpose on here. And one of the things that is interesting is the way that these pieces of land, these areas are described. Often what you'll find is they'll either describe it as a overall meets and bounds where they're going and covering the entire area, or you'll find where it's what's called a strip easement. And a strip easement actually describes some sort of line and then describes how the overall boundary of that easement area describes the relationship between that strip of area and that's line that they describe. So for example, there might be a center line in which the easement is centered in equal distance on either side of the line. For example, this one here is actually 10 foot on either side of a center line of an easement, or it might be a line of reference. For example, it describes a line here, and then it says that this is 5 foot on one side, 10 foot on the other side. So it's not always a center line as far as a strip description, but it's some sort of reference to another line. You'll also see this many times with road plats in which they'll go and describe a baseline and then describe the easement referencing to that baseline. And then the other type of a easement description is what we commonly call an aliquot description. It's a description which describes or shows something of something else. So in this case, down in this illustration, we have lot number 3, and on here we have an easement, which is the northerly 10 feet of lot number 3. And that shows it there as that being 10 foot there, that's the easement there. Or possibly we might have a utility easement along the side, which is the westerly 5 feet of lot number 3. These are both created by going and using the geometry of the overall lot 3, and then having it go and calculate. In ArcGIS Pro, we use different tools for that. We use different tools for all of these different types. An interesting legal aspect of this is that you might have easements that are on top of or overlapping one another. That does not mean that one supersedes the other. It means they both have equal rights if they are given to different entities. So just be aware that you can have easements on top of one another, and it just means they all have those rights still to go and create them. So let's look at some demos. All right. So you're going to find in here, what I have here is I have actually both a parcel fabric, and you can tell it's a parcel fabric because I have a heads-up display, which handles records inside of there. And then we also have just regular old simple feature classes. So I have here, if I go up here, I have non-parcel fabric layers in which I have a set of construction lines, and I have an easement polygon layer. And then this is also a parcel fabric easement layers in which we have easement lines and easement polygons that are parcel types as defined inside the parcel fabric. And let's just go to the parcel fabric and we can go and see how they are defined. They are defined as different parcel types. And in this case, I actually used my simultaneous conveyances and called them easements. Same thing, they define them as separate parcel types. And what we want to do is we want to show you the different ways and different variations on here. My focus today is just sort of show you some of the construction methods, whether you're in the parcel fabric or not in the parcel fabric. So let's go and do the easiest one of all of them. This is basically a strip easement, and we're just going to create a center line, and from that center line, we're going to create both sides and the ends of it. We'll also go and talk about the end of it. So in this case, I'm going to go and start at this corner here, and I'm just going to go and use a direction and distance construct and just go 45 degrees north, and I'm going to go 150 feet here for my center line. All right. Sorry, I probably should have done it with my construction lines instead. Same thing. Go here, 45 degrees. Let's make it a little bit longer, but there we have it there. So there's the center line of this easement on here. So what we want to do in this case is we want to make sure that this easement is created parallel to that line. And here's where it gets really interesting because there's a couple of ways to do this. Most people, when they think of this, will go in here and say, well, there is a copy parallels tool inside of ArcGIS Pro. Let's use that. Copy parallels says the first thing, here's your selected line, and you could have multiple lines selected here. What template, what layer are we going to create these parallel lines on, and whether or not we delete this center line. In this case, we're going to go in and leave it. We're going to create it on construction lines, and we're going to go, just because we can see it this way, we're going to go 50 feet. One of the advantages of Pro is that we also have this show preview, so it automatically will go and show us what it's going to create before we actually go and tell it to create it. Also, with copy parallels, we have the ability to just do it on the left side of the line, the right side of the line, or both sides of the line. If we have more than one line, so it has some intersections, it will tell us how do we want to handle the corners on there and whether or not to go and remove any self-intersecting loops. In this case, I can go ahead and just copy it. It created two new lines. It created parallel lines because I told it to do it on both sides, and I told it to only do it once, but we could have multiple ones in here. So I've sort of created the beginning of this easement. My next step now is I want to go in here and I want to go and define these endpoints on here. So I've gone and created one on the end, but here's where it gets interesting because most easements will go and include a clause within the description that says the sidelines should be extended and trimmed to extend to the boundary of the parcel that's actually being encumbered by this easement. So in other words, the easement itself doesn't go onto an adjoining property. It only is constrained to being on the property of the grantor that's actually giving the property. So we now have an issue. How do we go and make sure that this thing ends at this property here? A couple tools in here to go and help us do this. We can go and I'm going to go and show you what my common practice is, in which I'm just going to draw some lines here. And what I've done is I've extended along this northerly boundary of the adjoiner to the south, northerly boundary of the adjoiner on the south over here. Why did I do it with two lines instead of one? Because there might be some variance in the actual bearing there. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off all those other areas, those other lines, so I don't have to deal with them as I'm using the tools, because I want to go and make it easy for you to see what these tools are doing. My next step is I'm going to go and use a tool, and I can use a couple of different tools here. There is one called Extend and Trim. Extend and Trim tool, I'm going to use that on one of these. The Extend and Trim tool allows me to go and extend or trim, and allows me to go and extend or trim without a selection. I can also tell it to recalc any COGO attributes when I do this. Let's go ahead and do that. And let's say, let's extend this line to here. And when I do that, you'll note it automatically extended and recalculated the distance on here. Same way over here, I'm going to tell it to trim that up. I did not have COGO values there, so it did not go and impact them. I could use that. I can go and do that same thing here, and then I could tell it to go and do the same thing here. Interestingly, though, this often fails at this point here. So I'm going to go and use a different tool here. Instead of the Extend Trim, I'm going to use one that's called Line Intersect. Now that Line Intersect, again, I can tell it recalc this and take this line and intersect it with this line here. When I do that, it will go and create these, and it actually splits the line. So the Extend and Trim tool goes and actually modifies the existing one and extends and trims it until it fits. The Line Intersect goes and takes those lines and just splits them at that intersection. I can then go in here and take this line and delete it, and take this line and delete it. I then have the full limits of my easement defined with the COGO lines. These lines I have not populated anything on, but that's all right. If I wanted to, I could go and do it that way. I probably would define in here as part of the name of this easement that this is a 10-foot wide easement, and that would go and serve as this definition and this definition. I then need to go and form the actual easement itself, and this is the non-parcel fabric easement. Two ways of doing that. Two ways of doing that. The first one is I actually go and use a um, create a polygon here, and I can go and trace these here. And I trace these polygons, and as I trace the polygons, you can see it going and selecting here, and I can finish that out. So it's gone and recreated the area that's enclosed by those lines. Not always the best way to do it. Sometimes there's a better way. So what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to go and select these lines here and here and here, and I'm going to use a different tool. I'm going to use the construct polygon tool here. Construct polygon tool will go and list those lines that I've used and created here. And it goes and lists what type of a polygon you're going to be created. And I can go ahead and just tell it to create the polygon. Couple different workflows, couple different techniques on here to go and do that. So these are sort of standard types of workflow techniques that are useful in here. I'm going to show you a different one though. Before I do, I know that there's a question here. Why does the extend trim tool fail in your second operation? I'm not sure why it does. I have just found that it does it with those specific lines on there. I don't know whether it can't be that they're too far apart because they actually intersect themselves, but I find it does fail on here. So what I was going to do is I was going to show you this other technique here to go and build this polygon here from that single line, that strip easement from that one single line. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here and say, let's create a polygon here. And I'm going to use the trace function. All right, the trace function allows me to go and trace a single line. Now, the first time I did it, I traced this boundary, but there's another way to do it. I can trace this, and I'm going to start here. And before I start tracing, I'm going to type O. Type O, or I can right click and say, look at my trace options and say, I want to trace with an offset. And this was 50-foot offset that we're using. Again, these options look a lot like the options on the copy parallel. But when I do this now, I can see that actually, did I do 50 feet? 50-foot on here, trace options. I forget whether that was actually how far I actually did this. Let's go and see. So now here, there's 50 feet on here. Actually, I've started. On here. I want it to go on the other side of the line so I can trace it over here to go and show where this is. Now, this is actually tracing up to here, and then I can trace it here and tell it, in this case, why is it tracing? And I should be able to trace it. There it is there. It's not liking where I put this. Go. So I use the trace offset on here to go in and build this. It's not quite complete yet because I have to go and fix this down here. So I can go to modify again and use a different tool. This is a reshape geometry tool. Reshape geometry allows me to go and reshape things without a selection. But since I have a selection, I'll go ahead and tell it to go ahead and do this. In this case, this tool is I'm going to use, and I'm going to go and snap on the area and create the area that I wish to include inside of this polygon now. So using this one simple geometry, I can illustrate a couple of different ways that I can create these strip easements for this use. Well, I'm going to get a little bit more complicated now, and that I'm going to go up here and show you how we can actually go and create something above and beyond that. So I'm going to go and use this, and I'm just going to go and do a couple of lines here. All right. So I have a couple of lines there. I'm going to use the trace tool now to go and create the strip easement that's 50 feet on each side of that center line that I just created. And I'm going to do it first by going and being on here. And I'm going to do O for my trace options. They should allow me, and why is it not? Well, and again, I want to look at my options. It's 50 feet on here. So as I trace on here, I can go here, and then I can clip back here. And as I click on this, it will go and create this offset line on here. So from that offset line, I can now finish doing the additional manipulation of trimming this up. Let's go ahead and do that. Let's get in here and trim up. And again, I can use the same thing where I take a line and then I can extend this, go parallel to here. So I have a line there. I can now go and do the extend trim. And let's turn these off just so we don't get confused by them. Let's trim that up, trim these up. All right. And let's go back here and create a line for this. And let's go back to modify, extend and trim. Let's turn these off too. Note it's also doing the same here. It won't quite let me trim this up here. I can trim up that, but
Oh,
it
there
won't
you
let me
go.
do the other.
I was gonna
I
say sometimes when I encounter that issue, it has to do with like scaling. So if I zoom in or zoom out,
Yep. The
it
other,
will do it.
yeah. The other thing is that often what will happen is if you've got it where it's going to set up both, it'll give you an error on one without on the other. So let's see also if I can go and extend trim this line with this line. Nope, because that was a multi-part line on there. That won't let me do that. So what I probably should do is extend this line straight to make sure if that's how I want to go and do this. So let's extend this straight, parallel here to here. All right. And let's go and do an extend trim here. Find intersect here and here to there. Delete that one. Let's go in. I think this is a single line. Yeah, so I will split that here. So what I've done is I've used the trace function, the trace tool on here to go and just draw the one single line and automatically go and allow it to trace without using the copy parallels. Use the trace instead. Again, I now have options. How do I fill this thing in? I can go in here and create a polygon here just by using the trace function again and just tracing. Oh, I've got a trace offset on, don't I? Let me go and turn off my trace offset here. And now as I go and fill this in, and finish that out. So the key on all this is actually figuring out what lines you're going to be creating before you actually create the polygon on here. Now, this point here, all I've done is I've create simple features on here. I'm going to switch over to the Aliquot description now, and I'm going to create something that's the east 50 feet of a parcel here. It's a little bit different here in that, how do we do this? We're going to use a divide tool, but really what we have to do is we have to copy this this parcel over to the easement parcel and then divide that easement out. So we're going to take this, we're going to copy it, and then we're going to do a paste special to our polygon layer, our easement layer. And whether or not I want to keep the attributes, I probably don't in here. So I now have my polygon on here. By the way, before I do anything, let me go. This was a tip that was in this month's um, newsletter. Was I don't like that it automatically goes and says turn on the automatically activate the move after I go and do a paste on here. Activate the move after the paste operation. That's in the productivity. If I uncheck that, when I do pastes, it won't automatically assume I want to go and move them. So let's get off the move there. So now I have my easement. I only have one thing selected. That's my easement. I can now go in here and do what's called a divide to go and create this. Here's the divide tool, and I can tell it this is my easement that's selected. I want to do it with an equal width. And in this case, I want to do 50 feet, but I have to tell it which side of this I want to go and select. And I can tell it that I want to select this side of it. And if I zoom in here, I will note that it's actually previewing for me that it's going to select out this 50 feet here, and it's going to cut this. This is non-parcel fabric. This is just purely what it's going to do. It's going to go and divide this up into two different parcels. We then will select and actually go and delete the other one, that the other side that we don't need. So now let's take This is the side that we don't need, so let's delete that. And here is our 50-foot easement for this, split out from that. So from Aliquot description, if it's along a normal straight side, it actually is not that tough to do with the ArcGIS Pro tools. You can use the divide tool to go and tell it what side you want to come from on here. So if I go in and tell it, let's take this other part back because I'm going to go and divide that up now. And I'm going to unselect my tax parcel. And now I'm going to go and take 10 foot off of the bottom here. Again, using my divide tool, divide, here's my easement parcel. In this case, I'm going to do 10 foot, and I'm going to tell it on the bottom here. And you actually see that it's split that up. I now have that. And I can take, this is my remaining, and delete that. So I now have 50 foot here, 10 foot here. If I wanted to intersect it or wanted to overlap it, I could create that overlap. If not, I could just leave it like this. Again, we're going to have to go in and attribute these, but in attributing them, we just need to make sure that we go and attribute it correctly and tell it what the correct name is. So 50-foot easement. All right. This here is a 10-foot easement. And I could even go and label these. Let's go ahead and label them with the correct components. Shape length in here. We want actually the easement name here. Single class. And we'll tell it that we want it to regular placement. We don't care about that. Straight inside there. Straight inside. And let's also tell it. All right, so we've gone and created these. Again, we've gone and annotated them. We've attributed them. Creating easements inside of simple feature classes is really a process of either creating the lines that are associated with that easement, that define that easement, the center line, the reference line, then creating the parallels on here. And how we create those parallels is dependent upon sort of the tools and the circumstances itself. And then going and making sure that the easements are extended or trimmed or however it's defined on here.
There's a question in the chat. Do
Easements
easements
have
have
any
any?
topology associated with them.
Yes.
That really is dependent upon the organization. For the most part, an easement is a standalone interest in the property, and the only topology rule should be, do you have lines associated with it? And if your organization decides they don't want the lines, then you really don't have that. If you were to do and create a rule, a business rule, not a topology rule, what I would say is that the rule should be that that easement that's created must be contained within what's called the parent parcel, so that an easement doesn't go and overlap onto an adjoining parcel where that adjoiner may not have granted that easement. So again, that's not a topology rule that you would do, but that's the only type of rule that I could think of. An easement is a freestanding document, and it doesn't matter whether they overlap, whether or not. Again, from a organization or structural standpoint, you might consider saying, well, I have to have lines defining where the boundaries of that easement are, but that's in organizations. I know lots of organizations that don't even care about those lines, but you might want to consider that. All right. So that was now simple feature classes, non-parcel fabric. And as we saw in here, sometimes we can use Kogo to create those. Sometimes it doesn't have Kogo on it. But how would we create a easement inside of a parcel fabric? Let's go ahead and do this. The first thing is we create a record. Let's call this easement demo. Why do we create a record? A record is a way that we can relate everything about this, and it automatically will go and ensure that if it is part of a record, if you can come back and say, well, what was created as part of this? The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go and I'm going to create a connection line. Connection line inside the parcel fabric is a non-boundary line for that parcel. And I'm just going to go and say, well, let's do this again, 45 degrees north. And let's do this at 300 feet here. So I now have let me go and do this correctly. A connection line here. 45, 800 feet. All right, until it's good. So it automatically will go and store that and say that that's actually part of the definition of this document, what was created as part of this document. At this point, it's exactly the same as the other. I can go and do, all right, let's go and create parallel lines in here. So I would go in and do copy parallel. And I would tell it that I was creating now easement lines in here, 50 feet apart here. Perfect. Go and do that. I would then go and create my other lines, easement lines here, here to here. And then I'm going to go and do the same thing. I'm going to create lines from here to here to here. And I'm going to turn off the other things that are in here. And I'm going to go and use my other tools. I would use extend trim. I can use either one of these. Let's go and say here to here, here, here to here, here. All right. Delete that. Delete this. Delete this. Once I have that inside the parcel fabric to build the polygon, what I do is I tell it to go and check and what's called create seeds, which basically says check all the lines associated with this record and see if they form a closed polygon. It does. I can then tell it to go ahead and build this record, and it will automatically build it for me. I don't have to go and do anything. It uses the lines that are defined as being part of that record and uses that to build them. Note on here that it did not build two separate ones because the connection lines are defined as being structural lines. They are not boundary lines, so it overlooks them. If I go in here, by the way, and I say, show me everything that's associated with this record, and go over to my attributes, I can see that I have 5 easement lines, some of which are defined, some of which are not defined with Kogo. I have 1 easement polygon, and I have 5 points that are all part of it. So the parcel fabric helps us to go and do a couple things. One, it keeps track of everything that was created as part of that document. It also makes sure that they're all related so that we can come back at some time in the future and say, well, show me what was created when this thing was created, or show me everything that was part of this document. And it allows you to go and handle that. The actual construction of the lines, it really doesn't make a whole lot of difference. It looked almost exactly the same. The problem was that, or not the problem was, but because the line construction and the traverse tools and several other tools are parcel fabric enabled, they know that when you have an active record, in addition to the normal type of geometry functions, do other things. For example, they might calculate, well, let's look at this. When I look at this line here, this line actually has not just the Kogo values that were calculated, but also that, in fact, these are plus or minus, meaning that they were computed, they were calculated by the actual operation of doing that line intersection and the extend trim. It actually said these were not the original ones that were entered, but these have in fact been impacted by an operation. That's in the parcel fabric. That's not available with simple feature classes at all. Even though they are Kogo enabled, they do not have this Kogo type function in there that's available for them. All right, what else do we have here as we zoom out? What about when we have to do an aliquot description? Let's go and create another record. It's a different, this is easement demo 2. This is a different document that creates that easement. Now what we're going to do is we're going to do the same sort of thing we did with the aliquot descriptions, but this time we're going to do it with a parcel fabric enabled component. So now when we go and say do a divide, it's going to say, well, what are we going to create in here? We're going to take this and we're going to do an equal width, and this is going to be 50 feet. Well, if we do it, it's going to actually create this polygon in here. It's going to go and divide the tax parcels. We don't want to do that. So let's think maybe we go and duplicate this parcel onto, this is actually our easements layer, put it onto our easements. Then we go and delete and cut it out and say 50 feet off of here. All right. And when we do this, we'll see that there's a difference. Inside the parcel fabric, it actually went and let's look at this and say select all that's part of this. It actually created lines for us. It created the easement lines for us, created the easement polygons and the points associated with that. And if we look at this line here, we look at this line, it actually has that this was created, and here's the actual distance for that line. It did not calculate, excuse me, there's the bearing for that line. It did not calculate the distance field. Why not? The distance field was not called out on the deed. What was called out is that it was an easement that was parallel to that, but it didn't say that it was supposed to be 50 feet. It said whatever that distance is, that's going to be fine. We could tell it to calc that, but we didn't as part of the standard on here.
Frank, there's a question in the chat. Does
Yep.
the parcel fabric somehow relate an easement to the parcel that it's against?
By default, it relates it to the actual record. It does not relate it to the underlying parcel. We could set up an attribute rule that says capture the parent parcel ID of this. You want to be careful with that because parcel IDs change as you go and do splits, combines, merges, parcel ID. So parcel ID is not a permanent identifier. It's a dynamic or temporary one, but you can go and do this. You can relate it if in fact you go and create the easement and the parcel with the same record. Also, I see another comment in here that it said they saw extra lines in the easements. Yeah, there was somebody has very good eyesight there, because when I did this, what happened was I actually went and said select everything associated with this, and it went and it split that parcel and completely and created lines for the exterior of that parcel. That's when I did the duplicate parcels and made it easement parcels. It copied the lines from the tax parcels and copied them onto the easement parcels. So it did in fact create these duplicated lines in here, which really aren't part of this one easement. So the workflow I did was mostly to demo how you could create that Aliquot part, but I did not use all the actual workflow procedures. I could have done it a different way. But yeah, it's very sharp. Good. Thank you for picking up on that. Yeah. So let's see here. What else could I do? If I go back here and say delete that feature, so I still have this feature here. Let's clear it out. Let's select this one easement feature. Let's go and show another aspect of this. If I go and delete this feature, because a parcel inside the parcel fabric contains a couple things. It contains the polygon and the lines associated with that polygon. When I did this before, I simply did a delete here. If I go and do a delete parcel now on here, a duplicate parcel, delete parcel, Frank. If I go in here and do a delete parcels, what will happen now is, if you pay attention, when I do and say, show me all these, it's deleted all of these parcels that are not related to anything else. Interestingly, why did it not delete this line and this line? Because they were not split in here. When I use the divide tool, it doesn't automatically split the line here, but it leaves it as the same so that these two lines are still part of that definition. Let's go back one more time and let's actually do this. I still have the same record, so we don't get confused. Let's make sure we turn these off and we're dealing only with the easements now. Now I can do, again, some counties don't really care how this is done. Others are very, very particular. If I want to go and split this line, let's just show you that it is a line, that line with this line. All right, the way I would do it is I would use a line intersection, tell it to recalc, and I would say take this line and split them. This line and split them. Now I would go back and say, let's take this parcel and do a delete parcel. When I do that, by the way, that's now part of that one. So should only have one. Got duplication in here. That's the original one here. Let's go and delete that. All right. So with a parcel fabric, when I tell it to delete it, I have to be careful. I don't use the standard delete, but rather use the parcel delete. When I do that, it will take and delete the polygon and those lines that are only associated with that parcel polygon, not associated with anything else. Go through there. Any other questions? And what we've done is we've gone through a couple different things. We looked at parcels, we looked at construction methodology. How do you create easements inside ArcGIS Pro with just simple feature classes, building lines, offsetting them, tracing them with offsets, extending, trimming, making sure that they worked, creating Aliquot polygons by going and selecting a parent and then telling it to go and offset it. We've also done the same thing inside of a parcel fabric. Showed you the same thing, the different techniques. The thing to remember is that with ArcGIS Pro, you're using the same tools. The only difference is whether or not they're enabled in doing additional things, such as marking where the cogos came from, building the polygons if you have lines defined as being part of that record, those sorts of things. So it actually makes it easier if you do it correctly and you use the process. All right. So any other questions on here?
None in the chat.
All right. Well, thank you. And hopefully you enjoyed it and hopefully you'll come in and join us the next time. Thank you.